What's up guys, it's Brad from That Architect here. In this video, I'm going to show how to create a large-scale gasoline explosion with burning particle debris and tracers inside of Blender 2.92 utilizing the KHAOS add-on and a man-to-flow simulation. This video should be pretty straightforward, but can be applied in a lot of different situations to get really awesome explosion results. Anyways guys, let's get started. We are inside of Blender. Let's go ahead and first just delete everything in our scene here. And I'll go to our camera panel here and switch the render engine to cycles really quick. And first we're going to just add a ground for our simulation to be in. So I'll just go to our KHAOS tab here and scroll down to our collision object. So I'll add a collision cube. And now I'll just scale this down on the Z-axis, scale it up a little bit to create kind of a ground for our scene. And if you don't know what these collision objects are, it's just a very basic mesh that we've enabled the collision properties on for both particles and fluid. So in other words, our fuel particle debris will interact with it as well as our smoke simulation. Okay, so now let's go ahead and add some initial fuel fields for our explosion. So I'll go to the KHAOS tab here again, and we'll go ahead and select Dynamic Smoke Fire. And I'll scroll down here to the KHAOS particle parameters. And as I mentioned in our previous video, in Blender 2.92, the explosions tend to look a lot better, in my opinion, when we increase the initial starting velocity. So for this initial explosion, I'll maybe just put this at, we'll try something like maybe 4. And we'll try the initial ending velocity at 4 too, just so there's not much change there. And we'll leave everything else the same here for our particle parameters, maybe adjust some later in our particle tab. And now we'll just go ahead and choose on our timeline when we want our explosion to start. So maybe I'll start at frame 24, about a second in. And now I'll just click on omnidirectional burst. And now, as you can see here, we have our smoke domain with the KHAOS Fire shader within it, and our omnidirectional burst here. So I'll raise this up above our ground plane, raise up our domain cube as well, maybe scale it up as well, and let's select our omnidirectional burst here and see what we're getting so far. Alright, so super basic explosion so far. I'm going to go to the particle tab here and adjust a few things, since this will be kind of the base of our blast. I'll increase the number of particles to 1000, so we have a lot more fuel in our scene. Then I'll change the end frame for our fuel field to maybe 27, so it just doesn't emit particles for quite as much time, and it's a little bit more of a sudden blast. And then I'll scroll down here, I'll change the lifetime to 3. I'll change, maybe try 2 actually. Then I'll decrease the lifetime randomness for this one to 0.2. And then under velocity, I want to decrease the speed of these particles a little bit, since this is just that initial fuel that's emitting, and then we're going to add some more particle debris and emitters and everything. So this is just that very basic circular base of our explosion. I'll go ahead and change the normal velocity to maybe something like 16. And we'll go ahead and try this out really quick. So super basic explosion base here. I'm going to go ahead and scale it down a little bit, maybe put it closer to the ground. Alright, so this is just our base blast here, and we're going to shape it a lot more now. Before we do that, I'm going to go to viewport display and change the display as to cross, and that's just a matter of taste. It just seems a little bit easier to work with for me. Before I add our next fuel field, I might just scale our emitter a little bit on the y-axis, so we have a little bit more of an oval shape for our explosion, and just to add a little bit more variation so it's not totally uniform. Alright, so this is looking pretty good. Now let's add a few more particle emitters through the KHAOS add-on. So I'll go back to frame 24 here, and this time we're going to be using the 360 ground burst operator, but let's go ahead and first go down to our initial starting velocity parameters here. And for this next fuel system that we're going to add to our scene, we're going to kind of create that dust wave effect blasting out along the ground like we've done in some previous videos. So I'll go ahead and increase our initial starting velocity to 10. Then I'll do the same thing for initial ending velocity as well. And then I'll scroll up here, and we're actually going to use just the dynamic smoke type by itself. So I'll go ahead and select that. And now I'll just go ahead and select 360 ground burst. Now as you can see, we have a 360 ground burst in our scene, and when we scroll through it, we get something like this, which is not exactly what we want, but we'll go ahead and adjust it in our particle settings here, as well as adjust the scale of it in our scene. So first I'll go ahead and just place it down here by the base of our ground. I'll scale it on the Z-axis so it flattens out. And by doing this, as you can see here when we play through it, it blasts particles outward, which is what we want to create that kind of dust wave look like we've done in the past. So I'll just scale this down, and I'll go to viewport display, make it across as well, just so I can work a little bit easier. And I'll change the normal velocity to maybe 20 this time, and I'll decrease the randomize to 6, just so it's not quite as random. We just want particles to blast right along the ground here and create that nice dust wave for us. All right, so now it's looking pretty good here. I'm going to increase the number again to maybe something like, we'll try maybe 700 particles this time. All right, that's looking pretty good. And we'll also decrease the lifetime to maybe 3. So it's just not quite as large here. All right, that's looking pretty good. I might bring the lifetime randomness down to 0. And then I'll change the end frame of our particle emitter to maybe 27 and change the start frame to 26, just so it's a little bit of a delay between our first and second blast. So now we have something like this, which I think is going to look pretty good. We have our main omnidirectional burst blasting particles upwards and kind of in every direction, and then we have the secondary 360 ground burst just kind of blasting particles along the ground. Alright, so we'll go with this for now and see how it's looking once we bake it out. And now let's go ahead and add a few more 360 ground bursts, except this time we'll use the dynamic smoke fire option. So I'll select dynamic smoke fire, and we'll keep the initial starting velocity and ending velocity at 10 this time. And then we'll go ahead and go back to frame 24 again and add another 360 ground burst. And we'll drag this up. We'll maybe put the lifetime of these at 3. And it's going a little bit crazy here, so I'll decrease the normal velocities to 20. See what that does for us. And decrease the randomized to 6. Increase the number to maybe 700. Alright, and then I will also scale up our 360 ground burst on the z-axis to get a little bit more of an upward blast here. And then change the viewport display to cross. And I might decrease the velocity of these as well to something like 12. I'm just trying to fill in the space here just so there's not too much of a gap here. But this is looking pretty good so far. And now what we're going to do is we're going to add a few more bigger particle systems blasting out upward like this. So again, I'll go back to frame 24 and I'll keep our settings the same and add another 360 ground burst. Bring this one up, and I'll scale it way up on the z-axis, and I'll kind of rotate it off to the side here. Now we're going to start giving our explosion a little bit of variation in its fuel field. So something like this. I'll bring the normal velocity down to 20, and we'll keep the lifetime at 4 this time, but change the end frame of our particle system to maybe 27. And let's see what we're getting here. Now we're creating a little bit more shape to our explosion. We'll go ahead and increase the number of particles to 1,000. I'll decrease the randomized to 6. Alright, now we're getting a lot better shape here. So I'll go ahead and change our display as to cross again just to get a better idea. Alright, so this is going to look like a nice smoke plume here. So I'll keep this like this for now. And instead of adding a new particle system, I'm just going to duplicate this one. So I'll press Shift D and duplicate it. And then to duplicate the particle system so we can change its settings by itself without affecting the other one, I'll go ahead and select this button right here. And I will just rotate this particle system kind of off to the side and the other direction. And now it's just a matter of shaping our fuel field like we've done in the past to kind of give our explosion some variation. Maybe give the lifetime of this one something like 5. Increase it a little bit. Then maybe change our frame start to 27, frame end to 29. Just so it's creating a little bit of variation for our blast. And again, I'll go ahead and press Shift D, duplicate this system, duplicate it in the particle tab here as well so we can adjust the settings. We'll rotate it again, and at this point we're just shaping our initial explosion field here. And let's see here. A little bit too similar here, so we'll go ahead and change the frame start maybe to 26, change our lifetime back to 4. Let's see this, that's looking pretty cool. And finally I'll just duplicate it one more time, duplicate the particle system. Let's see, I'll rotate this one off to the other side, maybe change the scale of it a little bit on the z-axis so it blasts a little bit in a different style, something like this maybe. And then I might increase the number of particles to like, try like 1400. Then I might select this one here in the center and increase the lifetime to 6 so it just blasts a little bit further upward. And it's just going to create some variation in our blast. And it looks like we've just created a bunch of mess here in the center, but when we bake all this out, it's going to make sense. Finally, as I mentioned at the beginning of this video, we're going to add some burning debris particles in kind of a tracer form, dispersing from the explosion as kind of a secondary blast. So to do that, we'll go ahead and go to the KHAOS tab here. We'll deselect dynamic smoke fire, and instead we'll select burning debris. And we'll also use the 360 ground burst operator here. So we'll go ahead and go back to frame 24. Maybe we'll go a little bit later in the explosion, so it's kind of a secondary blast. Try maybe 27 or 28 maybe. And I'll go ahead and select 360 ground burst. And now if we bring our burning debris 360 ground burst here up, we can see what's going to happen here. That's just going to be some secondary particles that are going to be burning as they're emitted from our explosion. So let's go ahead and adjust a few of our particle settings here. I'm going to increase the number of these burning particles to something like, we'll try maybe 60. I also want to make it happen a little bit earlier, so I'll change the start frame to 28 and change the end frame to maybe 31, and that's looking a little bit better. Alright, and now we'll change the normal velocity to maybe 14, so it's not quite as fast. Let's see here, I'll go to the physics property here, and under drag I'll bring it down to 0.5, see what we're getting here. I might decrease the drag a bit more, and then also decrease our normal velocity, maybe to something even smaller like 6. Alright, that's looking pretty cool, kind of sliding along the floor here, blasting upwards, and there's quite a lot of randomness, so I think that's going to be some nice kind of cool tracer particles. For the sake of the tutorial, we'll go for this, but feel free to adjust these particle debris in a way that will create nice tracers coming out of your explosion, depending on your vision. I will go ahead and go to the cache tab of our burning debris and bake it. Also, just in case, I will go ahead and bake the rest of our particle systems as well. So I'll just select them and bake them one by one. And this is just so we don't have to have Blender calculate where the particles are going to be every time. And now, as you can see, we can kind of scroll through very easily and just see what we're getting so far. Alright, so now that we have kind of our general explosion setup and fuel field with our burning particle debris, let's set up our domain to bake our initial explosion base mesh. So I'll select our smoke domain here, and the main thing we want to do is we want to make sure that it's big enough to contain our explosion. So just to be safe, I'll increase the size a little bit. You don't want to do it too much, as the bigger you make it, the more resolution you'll need to add. Alright, something like this should be pretty good. And I'm also going to add a light to our scene, just so we can see our smoke a bit better. So I'll scale this light up, give it a little top light, maybe increase the power a bit in our light tab here to 1000. And I'll just move this one off to the side. I'll press Shift D, duplicate it, put this one off to the other side, rotate it toward our explosion. Now we have some lights lighting up where our explosion will be. Select the domain cube again, and now we'll go to the physics tab while our smoke domain is selected. And under our fluid settings, we can change a lot of different settings here, but it should be almost there based on our initial smoke domain KHAOS imported for us. But let's go ahead and increase the resolution divisions to maybe 196. Since we increased the scale of our smoke domain a little bit, it's nice to also increase the resolution divisions to compensate for that. But again, like I've mentioned in previous videos, the higher amount of resolution divisions you have, generally the larger in scale your smoke simulation is going to look. So that's just a parameter that can change the general size and scope of your explosion. I recommend keeping this fairly low, and then as you do your experimentations and various bakes to see what you like, you can slowly increase it depending on the look you're going for. Alright, so we'll leave all these the same. Under the fire tab here, I will decrease the reaction speed a little bit to maybe 0.18, just barely. We have a lot of fuel particles, so I don't think it's going to burn off too quickly, but feel free to change the reaction speed. If you want a little bit more of a gasoline style look and you're not getting enough flames, you can decrease this reaction speed quite a bit and give it even more flames. But I think this should be just about right, since we have, thousands of particles in our fuel field. And yeah, this should be pretty good. I'm going to go ahead and save our project really quick. Call it 2.92 explosion tutorial. Save it. And now I'll go to the cache tab under our smoke domain settings, and I'll choose a place for us to save our simulation data. So we'll go to that 2.92 explosion tutorial folder, create a 2.92 explosion cache, and we'll go ahead and accept it. And now all of our smoke simulation data will be saved in that folder. And we'll change the end frame of our simulation bake data to maybe 130, so just a little over 4 seconds. And this should be pretty good. So now we will go to bake data, select it, and give your computer some time to bake our original explosion base mesh. Alright guys, so we are back and we have baked our initial explosion here and it's looking really awesome. As you can see, we have some nice tracer burning particle debris here and a pretty large scale looking explosion. So before we bake our high resolution noise on top of our explosion base mesh here, what I'm going to do is I'm just going to, in our viewport here, choose a angle that I want to just render out a preview in, just to make sure we got our timing right. So I'll choose this angle right here, then I'll go to my output settings, change our output to 65%, and then I'll just go to View, Viewport Render Animation. And now Blender is going to go through all of the frames in preview mode so that we can play it back in real time. Alright, so once Blender has gone through the frames here, to play back your explosion in real time, you just go to Render and View Animation. And this window will pop up where you can see the preview in real time. And our explosion is looking pretty cool here. I think maybe the flames are burning off a little bit too quickly for my taste. However, I'm going to go with it for this tutorial. If you get the same result, maybe decrease the reaction speed of the fuel like I did a little bit in this tutorial, but just bring it down to maybe 0.1 or something to get a little bit more of a fiery result. But of course, we're going to make a lot of this fairly fiery within our fire shader settings, so I wouldn't worry about it too much. Another thing that isn't really perfect are the burning debris particles here. I think generally they're doing the right thing, but I don't like how they're kind of falling off fairly quickly here. I think they can move out a little bit more and make a bigger arch, but that's just kind of a minor tweak. Generally, I think this explosion is looking pretty awesome, so let's go ahead and bake that high resolution noise on top of this explosion base mesh for a little bit more detail. So I'll go ahead and close the window here. Now I'll just select our smoke domain here, and we'll go to the smoke domain settings under the physics properties and scroll down here to the noise checkbox and select it. And we'll keep all of the settings as they are right now. We'll up-res our simulation by 2. If you want a little bit more detail, if you're rendering some close-ups of your simulation or something, you can crank this up even more. But for the sake of this tutorial, I'm going to leave it at 2. And right before I press bake noise, I'm going to go ahead and save our project so we don't lose anything if our computer crashes. And now we'll just go ahead and select bake noise. And then once again, we'll give our computer some time to simulate that noise on top of our original explosion base mesh for some more detail. Alright guys, so we are back and we have baked the high resolution noise on top of our explosion base mesh, and it's looking pretty cool here. Let's go ahead and set up our explosion to be rendered and then play around with the smoke domain settings to get a nice looking explosion. So first I'll go ahead and just add a camera here. So I'll press Shift A, add a camera to our scene. We just push this off to the side, go to View, Viewpoint Camera. Now I can just kind of choose a little nice angle for us here. We can change this later, but this is just for our test render. And before we play around in our smoke domain, let's go to our render properties tab here. And under render, we'll change the samples to maybe 32. Then we'll go ahead and enable adaptive sampling. And then under advanced, we'll select the seed stopwatch. And that's just so when we render out our animation, there will be some noise variation. And now under light paths, I will increase the volume bounces to at least 4. And that's just so our light can bounce around our smoke a little bit more and give it a much more realistic result. And now we'll go to volumes, and under the step rate render, we'll change this to 0.05. That's just to increase the detail in our render. And I'll do the same thing for the viewport. And I'll increase the max steps to, we'll try 300. You can leave these values at their default, but I found that these work a little bit better for me generally. Alright, so now under film, I'll make it transparent. And I think this should be pretty much it for now. Alright, I'm going to go ahead and select one of our area lights here, and I'm going to increase the power of this light to 3000. And I'll do the same thing to the other one, maybe 2000 for this one. And then I'm also going to go to the environment tab here and add a environment texture through an HDRI. So I'll go ahead and just open up an environment texture here. I have one downloaded here from HDRI Haven. And this is just so we can have a little bit more realistic environmental lighting for our render. You can use your own light sources depending on the look you're going for, but I found that it helps to get a little bit more realistic result. Alright, so now let's go ahead and go to the shading tab here. And we are in preview mode in Eevee right now, so let's go ahead and go to cycles. And I'm going to get out of rendered view really quick just so we can adjust a few things. I'll go to the viewpoint of our camera. And I'm also going to select our ground plane here and then just add a new material for it. And I'll make it a diffuse material. It's slightly darker. And then under its object properties tab, I'll go to visibility and make it a shadow catcher so that it only renders shadows of our explosion. Alright, now let's go ahead and select our smoke domain here, and as you can see here, the KHAOS Fire shader is ready to go for us, and now we can start playing around with our smoke domain settings to get a better looking result. So I'm going to go to layout mode here really quick and just go to where our explosion flames are a little bit more prevalent, so maybe frame 50, and I'll go back to the shading tab. Now I'll go to render view, and now we can start adjusting our KHAOS Fire shader to get a better looking explosion result. And it's looking pretty cool here, but it's not really very dense right now. So what I might do is I might increase the density to something like maybe 1500, which will give us a little bit more of a large scale look for our explosion. Alright, so that looks a little bit more dense. However, I do want to get the flames to come through our smoke simulation a little bit more. So I'll just go ahead and increase the flames brightness to maybe 20. And now as you can see here, we're getting some pretty nice looking flames here. I'm going to just kind of get closer to our explosion to show the detail that we have. And as you can see here, there's quite a bit of detail in our smoke and fire. There's lots of turbulence in it since we've used a initial velocity of our fuel fields that's fairly high. So there's a lot of smaller scale detail. At this point, it's just a matter of tweaking the smoke color, the smoke density, the smoke contrast, the flames brightness, and the flames contrast to get the result that you're going for. So generally what I do is I'll change the smoke density until I get the smoke to look dense enough for the scale of explosion that I'm going for, and then after that I will adjust the flames to push through the smoke, and then finally I'll use this black slider on the color ramp to more precisely control how much the fire is coming through the smoke. So as you can see here, if I slide it over to the right, there's a little bit less fire coming through the smoke, but if I slide it over to back where it was, the smoke doesn't really hide the fire quite as much. But all of these settings depend on the look you're going for. If you don't want to go for a large scale look, you can dial down the density and go for a smaller scale look. But of course, the scale of your simulation is going to depend on both the fire shading settings and the simulation result itself. So those are two factors to consider, but I'm pretty happy with this result, so I'm going to go ahead and go for it for a test render. Alright, so I will go to solid mode here and go to layout, and I'm going to adjust our camera view here just so I get a nicer angle of the fire on our simulation. We'll try something like this angle here, and at this point we could also add some other debris fields if we want, but for this specific tutorial I'm going to just use the burning debris that we already have there, so I'll go ahead and skip past this step. But we do have other tutorials on showing how you can add various debris to your renders to get a more explosive result, but since this is more of a gasoline style explosion, we'll just leave it as it is. And now what we want to do is we want to output our explosion render. So what we'll do is we'll go to the output tab here and we'll increase the resolution to 100%. I'll change the file format under output to OpenEXR. And here under the output tab, I'll go ahead and just create a folder to save our image sequence. So I'll just call this 2.9 explosion output, and we'll name this folder explosion beauty pass. This will be our main explosion pass. All right, accept it. And if you want to composite your flames with a little bit more control, I generally like to export an emission pass as well, which will isolate the flames and export that by itself so you can add glow and glare and all that other good stuff to it separately. So to do that, I'll just go to the layer properties tab here, and then under the light tab here, I'll go down to other and select emission. And now if we go to the compositing tab, we can go ahead and select use nodes. And we can press Shift A, add another output for file output, and move our emission pass to this file output. And then here we can choose where we want to save our emission pass. Alright, so now that we have our file outputs ready to go, I'll go back to layout mode, and I might just adjust our camera here one more time to get a slightly lower angle view to make the explosion look a little bit more powerful. And since we're going to render a still frame of our image, I'll just go to render and render image, and let's see what we get for this test render. Alright guys, so this is a result from our test render, and it's looking really awesome here. As you can see here, some pretty good detail in the smoke and fire. Of course, with some compositing, you can change a lot of how the simulation looks, adding some glow and glare and adjusting the colors a bit to maybe bring in some more red to the explosion. So a lot of different things you can do in that process as well. To finish off your explosion and to render it out in those outputs that you've created, all you would do is just go to render and render animation here, and Blender will go through your entire timeline and render out your explosion with an alpha channel for our output. And then you can do the compositing in the compositor of your choice. Anyways guys, that's it for this video. I hope it was helpful. As always, feel free to leave a comment if you have any questions or suggestions in the comment section below. Let me know if you want any specific explosion tutorials in the future. I'll be releasing more of these weekly, so stay tuned, and I'll see you next time.